All right, I think that we get started. Welcome to the first departmental seminar for the semester. And actually, if you look at the, can you turn that back on, please? Yeah. Okay, I'll turn it back on. So, if you look at the schedule, we actually have a gap. After this week, it'll be another month before we have our next speaker. So, actually, if you want to dry run talks in that period of time, or if you have comp coming up or defense or whatever, let me know. We can probably schedule today, we're continuing our theme, sort of related to big data, data science, that kind of thing. And we're privileged to have Matt Byerly, who is the director for the Center for Mental Health Research and Recovery, who will be speaking to us today. He actually has a background slide that will give you more of his history. So I'm going to let him do that and introduce himself. Matt, welcome.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. I'm wondering how much you're trying to figure out the potential relationship between our center and computer science, mental health. And so that really is my goal today, is to share with you what we're doing, some of the things related to computer science and technology in health, and especially mental health, with the I'll be very overt about this. The ultimate goal is to see if we can establish collaborations with your youth postdoctoral students and new faculty in working with us in the center. The challenge for me in trying to do that is that I'm a physician who does not have a strong background, to say the least, in computer science, as my coworkers would find it laughable even to give that description. And so what I've been finding increasingly for our center is it's important for me to share what we're doing and a little bit about what's going on in the field, and then to have people who have expertise that could potentially relate to what we're doing find the link to us. So a bunch of this would be on you to be thinking about, well, this is the line of work I've been doing, and I can now see an application to what your center is doing. And for any of you that have any interest in working with us, I would love to sit down with you and discuss the potential of that. There's a specific project that we're beginning to develop that we'll talk about the faculty meeting tomorrow, but please don't consider that being the limit of what we could potentially work together on. So I'm a psychiatrist. That is, psychiatrists are either medical doctors or doctors of osteopathy. Those are both physicians in the U.S. who go to that schooling and then do 4 years of specialty training in psychiatry. The doctors of osteopathy and medical physicians, they work in the same residencies together. And your first year is much about general medical care, delivering some babies, continued assist in some surgeries, that sort of thing, lots of internal medicine. And then the last 3 years are very focused on mental health, learning about mental health diagnosis and treatment. I have, throughout my career, been in an academic setting where I was involved in research and a lot of teaching and a significant amount of clinical care. My particular area of focus has been in treating people and doing research with individuals that have psychotic disorders. And so I've been the director of a schizophrenia research program in UT Southwestern. So one of the 5 medical schools in Texas. And in the past, much of that work that I did was clinical research. So clinical research usually means working with humans who have a particular condition and usually evaluating better diagnostic and treatment approaches, testing those. Then in the last 2 years, I got involved in what we call translational brain science research, where we were lucky enough to get one of 3 NIH centers to study a condition called Fragile X syndrome. That was a big growing experience for me personally. I had to learn a whole lot more about neuroscience just to work with our basic scientists working with mouse models. And so Fragile X is a really neat condition that you haven't heard about it, perhaps. Anyone here heard about Fragile X syndrome? Why, you have. So I promise you will hear about Fragile X syndrome in the next 5 to 10 years. This is one of probably the top 3 investments that the National Institute of Mental Health is placing in brain research. And that's because it's the single gene disorder that has the largest number of people affected that presents as a syndrome of one of our common neuropsychiatric disorders. So half of people with Fragile X syndrome have a syndrome of autism or autism spectrum disorder. So we now have a single gene model of one of our major conditions. And so this is becoming very important because trying to study brain disorders that have multiple genes, those are all of our common ones, has become extremely challenging. We've made very, very tiny steps forward in the last 3 decades for the common conditions. So now we're starting this other route, understand the gene abnormality and work forward to brain disturbances. Okay. Well, I already talked about my goals for our meeting. This is a little bit of history of our center. It was approved by the Board of Regents in September 2014. Dr. Francis Lefcourt, who is the department head for cell biology and neuroscience, was the center director until I came in August. Don't know why I left that one there. And we received our first grant about 2 weeks after I got here. Isn't that impressive? It took me 2 weeks to get home. I'm a bit of a slow starter, so obviously most of that work was done before I got here. And Francis Lefcourt, and actually an attorney who is an executive president of a leading mental health advocacy group in the state, co-wrote much of this grant. In the last couple of weeks, I got involved in had one of my projects added to it. So we have a few funded projects already. This is just a little bit about mental illness. I tried to argue its importance, and that's in health research where you always have to start is importance. That's everything for research, so isn't it? Making a case for the importance of what you're doing. 1 in 4 people in the U.S. experience a mental disorder. It's diagnosable formally. 6% of people in the U.S. have a serious mental illness. That means that for much of their year, at least, they're unable to work because of a mental disorder. That was this definition of the largest epidemiologic study. Here is a huge problem with mental disorders. It strikes young people. So when you think about cancer and heart disease and dementia, they affect people in the twilight years of their life. Mental illnesses affect people when they're young. 75% of people by age 24, so you carry this the rest of your life and its impact, which makes mental disorders the most costly of all health disorders in the world. Montana has especially high challenges with mental disorders. The highest suicide rate in the country, which is twice the national average. I heard about 2 more suicides in the last 4 days in Montana. Large populations who have rates of mental illnesses roughly double that of our general population. So Native Americans have roughly double the rates of depression and substance abuse as our general Montana population, and so do veterans. We have the second highest proportion of veterans per capita of any state in the country, only Alaska is higher. And on top of that, almost all of our states are at least rural or frontier designations where the usual sort of mental health diagnostic and treatment resources are greatly restricted. Here's the mission of our center: to improve the mental health and well-being of people in Montana, largely through an academic center, where we'll be especially trying to develop better prevention, diagnosis, and treatment approaches, but also trying to make contributions towards workforce development. It's a huge challenge in Montana, and I'll just mention that. So if you go east of Billings, there are a total of 1.5 positions of workers, of people who have any expertise in diagnosing mental disorders or treating mental disorders. East of Billings, 1.5 people. And the need is many fold beyond that. And that will be relevant for a few of the things that we're doing. There's just a tremendous lack of what we would usually have available. Very typical mission structure, but here's to give you a real sense of what we're trying to do. Contribute to neuroscience research aimed at better understanding the brain changes associated with mental illnesses. Develop and test better, as I described earlier, prevention, diagnostic, and treatment approaches. Here's one. We're also going to try to help speed the translation of what's known to be in advance for diagnosis and treatment into care. On average, advances take 15 years in medicine to go from publication in a journal to actually making it to clinical care. 15 years. Very problematic. Education is an important part of what we're doing, and outreach also dovetails with this, trying to help that best known practices are being rolled out into care as quickly as possible. This is our model for doing research, and this one I'm very excited about because coming from a medical school to a non-medical school, I wasn't sure just how successful we might be able to be at this. And in fact, we're being far more fortunate than I had even hoped, and I can give you a few examples. But our model is that we'll work in an area of extremely high need for mental health, and that we'll only work in these areas where we can do the work at a top national level. And that's so that we can actually make meaningful contributions and that we can be sustainable. We have to get grant funding so that our center isn't shut down when our initial startup funds are done. I'll just describe one example for you, and then these bottom two I can talk a little bit more about later. We have you saw that suicide is a tremendous challenge for us here in Montana. And it so happens that most of the suicide prevention programs have been studied in freshman and high school students, nationally, internationally. And we are lucky enough to be the first center in the U.S. to study a new, most hopeful intervention for youth. And it was published in Lancet in Europe in April. Lancet is like America's New England Journal of Medicine. It's the top journal in Europe for health. And what they showed is that they decreased suicide attempts in high school freshmen by 59%, and cases of severe suicidal thoughts by 52% over a year after this intervention. They also tested 2 other interventions against a control group. One of the 2 was the intervention most commonly used in the U.S., and that one did not outperform control at all. So this is a big advance, at least in Europe, and we're lucky enough to work with the group in Stockholm to be the first to do this, as I mentioned, in the U.S., but that wouldn't be quite enough to fit this model of working with a team that would make us exceptionally competitive for grant funding. And so we're lucky enough to work with a colleague of mine from my last institution who is the leading depression researcher in the country, and he's going to be testing this in 4 schools in Texas. And so with that team as a whole, we really will have We will be studying more promising suicide prevention intervention and doing it with the leaders here in the U.S. and in Europe. So that's our model of the type of work that we want to do. That's some of our grant funding. So, stuff you're especially interested in. Computer science and clinical. So I want to talk about computer science and mental health research, which is mostly what our center will be doing. But if any of you have an interest in applying your line of work to clinical aspects of care, we would absolutely be thrilled to do studies in those areas. This is just a recent publication that I pulled from that's describing technology uses in care delivery in children with mental health challenges. Okay? And this is something I'll tell you more about in a little bit, but these were their individual sections for the paper, and one of them was devoted entirely to computerized cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. I'll talk to you about that in a bit. Then a different section for other online therapies. So this is a non-pharmacologic therapy. Remote pharmacotherapy, which meant telemedicine, linking up with someone via telephone, and then mobile tools, smartphones, smart pads, with things like appointment reminders, delivering therapies actually, such as computerized CBT via a mobile phone, symptom tracking, and then a whole section describing potential virtual reality for exposure therapies. Any questions? No? So, computer sciences and mental health research. Well, there's a lot of money for this. If you have interest, there's probably money to be had. The BRAIN Initiative will invest $4.5 billion between now and 2015. And it's specifically focused on developing new technologies to study these brain disorders. It's all about the new technology. Remember me saying the past 3 decades we've made almost no advancements in understanding these disorders? So the field has said for the next 10 years we're going to invest in trying to understand normal brain function and to, in some brain conditions like Fragile X, better understand those conditions by developing better tools to study these disorders. And those tools, very specifically, are going to be technologies. Huge investment. Multiple federal funding sources. And then I was going to start by giving you a few examples to perhaps just serve as triggers for you in thinking about a wide variety of areas of investigation that would relate to computer science and mental health research. This one, I'm a little embarrassed to describe, but this one was kind of considered really cool technology when I started doing it way back when. Let's see, so 2007. So this is quite outdated, but this tells you how far behind things have been in health in relation to bringing in technology. This we were really tied with the first group to be doing this in the U.S., so we were considered cutting edge at the time. This was a study of how commonly people took their medicine, and this was in people who had schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. Those conditions are the most severe psychiatric disorders. So when you see someone standing on a corner talking to themselves, that person has schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder in almost all cases. In the vast majority of cases, when people develop these conditions, they will have trouble working for the rest of their lives. They will usually be disabled for the rest of their lives. This is the condition my eldest brother has, which, by the way, eventually led to me doing this line of work. And one of the challenges is that we have pretty effective medicines, where at the very least, most people who take medicine for schizophrenia can stay out of the hospital very consistently. But if they stop taking the medicine, they can get so sick they'll be a danger to themselves or others, just even if not just by neglect. So taking medication, if you have schizophrenia, is very important, and it's extremely costly to our society when you don't. You have to go in a hospital, usually in a public care setting, where your taxes will pay for their care. So most costly conditions in the world for health, this is one of the major contributions, hospitalizations related to schizophrenia. So this was a study of this phenomenon of medication taking, and we had two completely non-electronic assessments for how commonly people took their medicine. And for the patients, we just asked them in the last month, what proportion of doses did you take? And then we also asked their doctor, what proportion of medicines do you think your patient took? Same patients. And then we also had, for the patients, a pill bottle and a special pill bottle cap. And the pill bottle cap, really high-tech technology, obviously being sarcastic about that. But it did record every time someone opened their bottle. Right? Now, of course, they could open their bottle and not take their medicine, but I bet you'll agree if they didn't open their bottle, they probably didn't take their medicine. So they were probably at least this non-adherent. And then these bars are describing the proportion of patients by these two different ratings that were found to be non-adherent. Here, non-adherent meant you took less than 70% of your medicine. So if you ask patients, only 5% of them admitted that they took less than 70% of their medicine. By the way, the docs were clueless. So, and if you ask psychiatrists, many of them think they're pretty good at assessing non-adherence. They were terrible at it, but the electronic cap detected a whole bunch of non-adherence. This fits with all of the other research that's been done since. At least half of people don't take enough of their medicine, and falling below 70% would most likely put people at a risk of a relapse. So that was my first entry into using technology or computer science in mental health research. I'm actually admitting not at all sophisticated. This is a current project going on in our center where we are trying to make a contribution towards research in a new way of diagnosing mental disorders. So currently mental disorders are diagnosed by a grouping of symptoms. If you have X number of symptoms, then we say you have the disorder. The problem with that is we know it's not the best potential way to diagnose people because we have a lot of mixture in those populations defined that way. For instance, some people respond well to treatment, some people don't respond well at all with the exact same declared diagnosis. So one of the main approaches that we'll be using for the future is to try to categorize conditions not just on symptoms, but also on related brain changes associated with more core aspects of a symptom. And this is just one example of this whole approach is called RDoC, the Research Domain Criteria, for this new, more objective way of diagnosing. And this is one example of a construct called loss. And when you have that term they use, loss, when the NIMH says that the primary word they're talking about here is hopelessness. But by the way, when you have a lot of hopelessness, we know that you tend to have these behavioral changes, rumination, worrying, crying, okay? And we actually know that you tend to have these type of physiologic changes in some of your brain function, including hormonal. And we know that you have disturbances in these particular brain circuits. We can actually measure that. And so instead of having a condition called depression, we're now able to more dial down into a particular phenomenon related to specific brain changes, even down to some genetic associations with that hopelessness. The challenge is that now when we try to identify studies that are relating to this construct, that loss means a lot of different things in the scientific literature, right? It could be loss of weight. It could be loss of protein amount, even in different brain regions. It could be loss of all kinds of different things. So that RDoC loss doesn't mean a whole lot when you go searching the literature through PubMed, for instance. So what we're trying to do currently, especially with Chuck Carey, who's in our ITC, is try to use natural language processing to train a program called Deep Dive to ferret through articles so that when we say, can you find the articles that relate to the loss construct in RDoc, that you can do better at that than just a PubMed search. Because right now, PubMed search is almost useless. And so that's what we've been doing for about 3 months now. And the hope is that when we have a whole list of PubMed articles, we can work with a highly trained deep dive program to select out the articles in a more accurate manner. Okay? So natural language processing in large databases. This is one of the interventions I described, evidence for web-based cognitive behavior therapy. So increasingly, we're leaning on trying to deliver some interventions in mental health online. And especially in Montana, that's a big part of the work we're going to be doing with our center is digital and online interventions. Because remember, there aren't diagnosticians and prescribers out there. Very, very, very few. Cognitive behavior therapy is a treatment for depression and anxiety that, at least for mild and moderate forms of depression, is at least as good as medication treatment. And for anxiety disorders is as good as medications up to severe cases. Delivering that therapy online has been shown to consistently be effective until just tested in a very large, what's called effectiveness trial in Europe. And when they did it in Europe, when it wasn't, these two interventions weren't in the hands of developers, not sure what all that might mean for it, two different forms of online CBT just didn't get done by the patients. On average, they only completed one session. The most common number of sessions completed for each of the CBT intervention arms was one. And one arm required 6 to do the whole treatment, one required 8. They just didn't do it. So they basically had an introduction. And oh, by the way, it wasn't better than the control treatment. So what we clearly have to do is have more engaging online CBT approaches that would have people complete more of their therapy. So here's the good news. These versions that they just reported on the testing of were 8 and about 9 years old in their development. And they were mostly a bunch of text, almost as boring as my presentation. Just a bunch of text. And then you had to respond for some things, and it would cue you, do this, do that. And then you had homework, and then you come back and read a bunch more text. The current version that we'll be working on for online cognitive behavior therapy is about 95% videos. And then it has decision tree algorithms built into it, such that when you say, I have difficulties with this, this, and this, and you click those, and you get a response from a human saying, I understand that you're struggling with blank and blank. That usually means blank and blank and blank, but it's tailored for you. And then the treatment intervention actually gets tailored for what you should do. But it's all delivered by video from people who I would describe as incredibly engaging, more so than I would argue the average professional mental health provider delivering CBT. And in open label trials, they're getting on average more than 80% completions of the required 10 sessions for this, now with 4 different large companies. So this one has online delivery, algorithm decisions built into it, and unfortunately I couldn't find a way to, this is one of the very rare pieces in the program that's not active video. And this is feedback to an individual patient that's showing them graphically how their distress level has changed since they started the study in relation to this particular challenge. All right, I'm going to finish up with a description of this particular study that I'll be discussing in a little bit more detail at the faculty meeting tomorrow. And this is a potentially maybe a very, very large study. It relates to trying to understand the brain better, especially by using technologies. This is the major focus of this brain initiative I mentioned. It's getting at diagnosis and treatment challenges. The real goal, if you think of it in a relatable way, would be to try to create a mental health study that would be similar to the Framingham Heart Study for cardiovascular disease. Would you mind raising your hand if you're familiar with the Framingham Heart Study? Oh my gosh, I'm getting so old. The Framingham Heart Study is, in health, overwhelmingly acknowledged as the most important study ever to be done in all of medicine. And it's still ongoing. So I hope that if I come when I'm about ready to retire, we can say, the study's still ongoing quite a few years from now. The Framingham Heart Study took a large group of people and said, we want to measure a whole bunch of things about you now, and at least every year, and see if we can identify measurable phenomena in your body that relate to cardiovascular disease risk. And so that study identified that hypertension decreased the risk of heart disease, high blood pressure. We didn't know that before the minutes. One of the really big ones was that cholesterol, high cholesterol. So you probably just assumed we always knew that high cholesterol related to cardiovascular disease. That came from the Framingham Heart Study. Okay? And this is now, it's made many, many contributions, especially help clarify the risk of smoking eventually and lots of other wonderful stuff. Okay? So what we are proposing is a similarly designed study where people do not yet have disease, but we'll be studying people who are at risk of disease. Let me hold off on that just a bit. Let me describe for you the goals. So it'd be this: studying people initially and then very regularly over years and years to see how their measurable phenomena relate to the development of mental disorder and the response to treatments. And this would be a giant advance for us in a couple of ways. One is that, as I mentioned to you, we currently make diagnoses by syndromes, right? And that those don't necessarily predict response to treatments. So that leads very commonly for us having to try one treatment and another and another and another. So there are at least a dozen antidepressant treatments, which is actually probably more than 20, for pharmacologic treatments. And then there are at least probably 5 or 6 proven non-pharmacologic therapies for depression. But we don't know which ones to start with for an individual that would be most likely, would be the best fit for them. So if we could have diagnosing to be objective based on biologically measurable phenomena like the Framingham study, we could potentially match people more directly to the treatments they should best get. And we're also suspecting that if we can identify measurable factors that predict which people will develop a condition, because the next slide I'll show you will be starting with people who don't currently have a condition, but they're especially high risk for developing one, that if we can identify factors that tell us they're at exceptionally high risk of developing a condition, we can deliver preventive interventions that we couldn't afford to give to everyone as a society, but that we have a growing list of preventive interventions that especially help for depression and anxiety disorders. By the way, 1 in 5 women will develop major depressive disorder. 1 in 10 men will develop major depressive disorder. So if we could prevent a fair number of those cases by extra intensive intervention, that would be very important. Long-term study, we're actually talking lifelong, like in the Birmingham study. Once you're in, we'll follow you for the rest of your life if you're willing. As I mentioned, it would be people at high risk, and we'll define that based on having first-degree family members. So I would be high risk. Good news is I'm past the age risk of developing schizophrenia, but I have a first-degree family member with schizophrenia. So I could have qualified if I was between the ages of 15 and probably 25, is what we're thinking mostly for this study. But for depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, if you have a family history of that, before the development of your symptoms. And then we would follow people quarterly, 3 times a year, for symptom assessments, cognitive functioning. These are doc sort of cognitive functioning processes we described, whether they now getting any treatments for anything, and very extensive measures of everything that the field currently believes might be helpful in identifying risk factors for developing these disorders or helping to predict treatment response. These are going to be things like blood tests, cheek swabs, easy to get things. In addition, for about a fourth of the sample, we're going to do very extensive studies of their brain once a year through at least electrophysiologic and neuroimaging approaches. And we're going to be able to, probably especially through our math faculty, do some advanced analytic approaches where you combine these different measures into a composite measure that may have more powerful predictive diagnostic conversions and treatment responses. Currently, we're planning to study 100 people in the first year here, at least 100 in the second year, but then we would be wanting to go on for grants. And the ultimate goal of this is to literally have thousands of people in this study who would be at risk, with a bunch converting. And I'll describe how we'll hope to get to those numbers. And that's going to be especially through collaboration. The investigator mentioned that's the most successful depression researcher in the country. He's also the world leader in biomarker research and mental health. He and I were mentored by the same boss, and it makes us kind of in a scientific family. I hope you have that experience in your career. You have that opportunity at some point. Mentors are so critical. So we'll be this is another model of us teaming up with a national expert so that we're doing this in the leading way. And one of the things that really helps is he already has $11 million in funding to do this in Texas. And we're gaining funding here to do it. We at least have enough to start with year 1 while we're working on getting funding for year 2. We'll be collaborating with existing faculty across campus here, where we're currently anticipating perhaps half of our faculty leading analytic cores being faculty here at MSU and half at UT Southwestern in Dallas. There's also the potential to recruit in faculty for areas that we don't have expertise in, but we think would be really helpful for the project. And of course, it includes computer science in at least these areas. And also, we have strong interest already expressed by the University of Montana faculty. We hope to be having grants ready to go based on our pilot data within a couple of years. It's very clear to everyone involved that almost this exact project needs to have a separate project for Native American communities, because at least there's huge potential differences both genetically and socioculturally here for these individuals, and also for military servicemen. So we would be especially planning to get biomarkers on military servicemen before they go into active duty, and then follow them throughout life. I'm sorry, I'm going to speed up. So I'm almost done though. So potential roles for computer science in this biosignature work. One is developing new biosignatures through new neurotechnologies. We have others on campus who could be potential bridges in doing this. The laser and optics group, for instance, is working on potentially new brain imaging approaches, new analytic methods for current technologies such as EEG and neuroimaging, advancing current analytic methods. We know that people who have mental disorders have disturbances in the way that they look at things and follow things with their eyes. They have changes in their communication styles and their voices when they develop conditions. They have changes in the way they express themselves for happiness versus not, and so forth. And all of this has been studied with computer science almost entirely for about the last 2 decades, but the field is continually advancing. And then, as I mentioned, online cognitive behavior therapy, we will need to be testing more interventions with this study as things move ahead, including web-based approaches. And I was lucky enough to meet with Laura Stanley of the Mechanical and Industrial Engineering Department recently about virtual reality-based work that she's doing. With that. So, questions, thoughts, suggestions?
Are there some existing studies on a smaller scale that have been done sort of in this area?
Yeah. So what we have currently, it's a great question for all the postdoc students. I'm going to bet you're not a postdoc student. And so the question is, what's the foundation for this being the next step in research? And that's what you always have to know, is if that makes sense for whatever you're proposing, is this is a next reasonable step. There have been 2 large studies for biomarkers in mental health. One was in schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It's called the BSNP study, BSNIP. And that one was actually led by the chairman of our prior department. And that one is just like the other one. They're cross-sectional studies. It's a single look at someone actually with a disorder, full disorder, and measuring a whole bunch of these potential biomarkers or observable biologically measurable phenomena that might relate to diagnosis and treatment. When someone has a disorder, you meet them one time. How does this relate to how severe your symptoms are, to how well you respond to treatment? That's really the level that we're at. So in schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, one study, the BSNP study, and then a cross-sectional study that's a little bit more than that. It's a 3-month follow-up treatment trial. So it's a bunch of biologic measures, then treat people with cognitive behavior therapy, non-pharmacologic, or an SSRI, the most common type of antidepressants, and looking especially at treatment response in biology. And so Madhukar Trivedi's leading that one. That was a $16 million study that was actually, the study will be completed in about 3 months. And we'll have access to that biomarker data for about a year before publication, probably, that others won't yet have access to. So we have 2 cross-sectional or very brief studies with people with currently active symptoms. And so the field now believes it's reasonable to now start doing this longitudinal follow-up for folks with conversion. But that's a little bit of a guess and a bet, right? Because so we're going to put a whole bunch of money and investment into it and hope that the field agrees and that there's funding within a couple of years to continue the effort. So, by the way, so I should mention, we do have some early results already in the depression trial where, remember I described this RDoC approach to diagnosing? They've already shown some important subtyping of depression that's relating to treatment response based on biologic brain measures. So there's already appearing to be some payoff here, and then some positive findings also for the BSNP work. Yes?
So that data that's going to be available to you, is that including the data?
I'm sorry, that what?
That data you just said that's going to be available for your prior publication, is that including the data?
Yes. Yeah, so they'll be holding on to all of that real tightly. And so here's one of the unfortunate things about science is that there's this competitiveness thing, right? Because the way you survive as a research group is getting funding. And the best way to get funding out of someone else, at least in health sciences, is to have some preliminary data that argues that this is the reasonable next step, or that what we're proposing is informed on this data that others don't yet have. That helps kind of keep you ahead. But the nice thing is that NIH won't allow you to hold on to that data forever. All the contracts require that it be shared into databases that everyone can access within a reasonable period of time. And for most of these now, it's about a year. One of the things I would say is that when you think about genomics data in most of the mental disorders, it's largely had very, very little payoff. So one of the things we learned about schizophrenia, for instance, is there's about 108 genes, each of which made no more than at the most 1.5% contribution towards understanding the disorder. That's why there's this big investment in biomarkers, because just studying genes alone clearly isn't going to get us what we need for subtyping people for their best treatments that they should receive. At the very least, we know genomics won't get us there alone.
What sort of other things do you measure then in order to create these biosignatures?
So yeah, it is genomics, it's proteomics, it's metabolomics, but it also especially the neuroimaging approaches, functional MRI, as well as morphologic MRI approaches, measuring the shape of the brain, but also electrophysiology, especially through electroencephalogram, EEG. But we very well, you saw things like eye tracking, and facial expression recognition, and there will be a host of things that we have in there. And one of the things for sure that we're interested in doing is adding in ones that haven't yet been done with the 2 cross-sectional studies. But also having some information from them so we can dump some that look like they're having almost no value. Yeah.
When you talk about sectional study of people who just might get presenting with their general counselor, I'm curious how you're building the data on.
So that's a darn good question, and that's a big part of what we have to figure out, and that's what I'll give you an answer. but more helpfully perhaps for your postdocs is that's the sort of thing that preliminary data gets you, and that's what helps you be competitive for grants as opposed to not having the preliminary data. Because having the preliminary data says, hopefully, that you have found a way to address those challenges. Right? Because you will be able to declare we've studied X number of subjects and we've proven we can do this. So the current way we're thinking about doing that is approaching care centers, especially across the state hospital, the outpatient treatment program state by state, and there's also a tremendously connected network of people who have mental disorders within advocacy groups within Montana. So we're especially we're going to start with areas where we know that people who have family members with mental conditions tend to be, and then to be pitching our study to them. Our hope, frankly, is that this would become, through word of mouth, fairly commonly known. I won't do this to you guys, but when I asked my class on neuroscience and mental illness, how many of them had had a close family member with a mental disorder, it was every person in the class of 25 except for one. Okay? So mental disorders are super common. And the thought, especially in a really small populated state like Montana, is that we might be able to get word of mouth out quite a bit in presence through our website, and a lot of partners to help spread the word. But the hope, honestly, is that we would have several thousand people in Montana that would participate over time. And Texas probably considerably more than several thousand. And we're also thinking about the possibility of teaming up with an investigator or investigators in China. We're especially interested in different genetic, social, cultural groups to see if biomarkers might be different.
Yeah, can you comment a little bit on strategy? One of the things you said earlier is this goal of speeding up the transition essentially from the lab to practice. And a lot of the challenges there related to risk mitigation, validation protocols, and so on. So what kind of strategies do you have in mind to try to speed that up?
That is a very, very challenging question. I'll tell you a little bit about what the field's been trying to do. And I'm not sure what our next steps are going to be. What I would say is that for anything that we've been working on a project plan in advance for, we're going to be trying to, as we're doing that research, think about next step implementation. So as we're working on our suicide prevention study, we're thinking about having centers established for training the people to deliver it, growing, so that if the intervention is proven effective, we could roll it out to the state. And we're for instance, trying to develop a national center for Native American focus for developing this specific suicide prevention intervention. So it could be with specific projects, but if you think broadly for mental health, Medicare Trivedi and my mentor, actually John Rush, were the two most involved in trying to get at this issue through electronic approaches to convention. And they did a study called TMAP, the Texas Medication Algorithm Project. It was the largest algorithm approach to delivering care tested in all of mental health. And what it did is it took a collection of experts in mental health diagnosis and treatment and said, based on the literature available, what should people do in this setting, that setting, that setting, that setting? And stepwise, they should do this first, and then how much of this should they do? What dose of a drug, or how many sessions of psychotherapy? And then what should you measure along the way? And then at what point should you do something different? And then if you do, what should it be that you do different? This or this, those algorithm approaches. What they found is that trying to do it by pencil and paper doesn't work because people can't flip through things. And so they developed electronic support platforms for doing this. And boy, I tell you, 10 years ago, I said, I am positive in 5 to 10 years that mental health will be delivered through computer-aided decision support systems for mental health across America. But that hasn't happened yet. There continue to be developments in those sort of programs. The uptake has not been as extensive, has not been very extensive at all in the field. In Texas, it has been fairly extensive. One of the challenges, I think, is that psychiatrists tend to be less focused on evidence than some other fields of medicine, frankly. So I think if this was internal medicine or cardiology or surgery, it would be more likely that there would be more of these approaches. So if you ask an internist, what do guidelines say? So you've heard guidelines, you've heard that term, right? And so these guidelines are then put into a computerized decision support system. So you enter information about your patient and it spits out, you should do this, or you should consider doing that at this stage. So if you ask an internist, what do the guidelines say for moderate hypertension in a 40-year-old African-American male, almost every internist in the country will be able to tell you what the guidelines say. If you ask psychiatrists for a similarly straightforward, common question, you'd be much less likely to get there if they would know what the guidelines say. With evidence that's just as strong. So there's some challenges there. I would say that in coming here, one of the strongest desires of advocates in the state was that we would bring computerized decision support systems, which we did today have the most advanced forms of 2-1-1. We might do that. I'm not sure. It's really complicated by systems and care providers and interference and acceptability. So, our kind of behavior therapy, looks great, except when you did it in Britain, where people did one session and said, I don't want to do this anymore. So one of the real challenges for computer science is making things really engaging. And so that's one of the things we're going to be focusing on.
And with that, I think we have to stop. Thank Matt.
Grad students, if you